Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Sen Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan and Peter today. And today's topic is competition day feeding, when and what to feed. And this has come about from one of our good clients who asked this question because it's being brought up regularly, feeding horses before exercise and the timing about it and what has been traditionally done in some of the horse industries.
Yeah, Bryan, I think this is going to be a bit of a can of worms here, so we'll try to be very, very thorough and precise with what we recommend at Sen. Obviously, we can't speak for other companies, but can only speak for what we believe in and what we sort of practice, what we preach. So the question did come through, I think, last week about what do I feed on the day of competition? So this can relate to all sorts of disciplines. It could be a performance horse, it could be a race horse, it could be an endurance horse, it could be a show jumping horse. It's pretty much all of the above. And they wanted to know, well, what do we feed on race day? So we haven't really explained it in great detail, maybe when a phone call's come through or sort of on the odd email. But pretty much your diet doesn't change race day to what it is before competition to what it is, the day before that. The only variance is we recommend not to feed the Sen oil on the morning of the competition. And the reason for that is that the fat obviously takes a lot more energy to digest and obviously get it into the bloodstream. So you don't want to be using up extra energy to digest fat. So basically we give the normal evening meal with the Sen oil and all the other products. And then on the morning of the competition, it's the same normal meal, excluding the Sen oil.
So this could be new information for our horse clients that are feeding the Sen oil. And if your horse is performing well on that, and what we've looked into is that not feeding the oil on that competition day may have an extra benefit to the horse and use that energy in other parts of the body instead of digestion.
Yeah, look, it might be a 0.5% difference of improvement. It might be a 5% or a 10%. We don't know what the improvement is, but as Bryan said, from the researchers, fat does take a bit more energy to digest and obviously break that fat molecule. So we would recommend that you just add the Sen oil after the competition rather than doing it before the competition.
Yeah, that hard feed that is typically 4 to 5 hours before the competition starts or that morning. And it's different if you're training and you're providing the hard feed after the competition. But what we're trying to do is give you every little advantage you can. And that's what we've identified as some latest information has come through.
Yeah, correct. So, Bryan, let's get into it. There's a few, I wouldn't say wives' tales, but probably a few of these sort of, and I won't call them bad habits, that some sort of trainers, some people still might be practicing. And the biggest one that we have an issue is with drawing hay the night before the competition day. And it's a pet peeve of ours. Do you want to, Bryan, just sort of go into why drawing hay the night before the competition is not really a smart thing to do?
Yeah, are they worried about a hay belly? I'm not sure. But a horse without hay for more than 2 hours, it can have all sorts of effects on their digestive system, and most notably a higher ulcer risk, and especially when they need that saliva production to help support that whole gastric environment to help limit that gastric ulcer production that we see that is rife through the industry that's then treated with medications. So getting your roughage source right and feeding it on race day, because when you have that grassy hay access to the horse, they're chewing this and that produces the saliva, which acts as the buffer in the stomach and really helps support the whole environment there in a natural way instead of pulling the hay, relying on the medication, and then just going around in circles. And it's not good for longevity of the horse, knowing the side effects of the medications.
For our American listeners, lucin is alfalfa. So basically we're talking about drawing, like the old timers always, spoke about alfalfa, giving it in the morning of the competition. But just to summarize what Bryan said, even if you just look at common sense, so here you are worried about ulcers, you're taking the hay away the night before. So the horse has basically just had its, normal feed. Let's just say it's finished its feed because it's just a hoover. It finishes a feed at midnight. It's going to have a pretty empty stomach. It might get some sort of feed the morning of the competition, obviously excluding hay. So that acid is pretty much going to be rife for trying to produce or sort of cause more ulcers just because it hasn't had time to go down with the roughage, and that's how it works.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. It's providing that balance, and roughage is part of that balanced diet for a horse in performance. And providing that in the morning of the competition is really important.
And I think our equestrian sort of clients, maybe more so the endurance as well, they're pretty switched on with feeding obviously a grassy hay pretty much up until competition. And I don't know whether in the endurance field, whether they actually give them extra hay on the pit stops as well or not. I think that just comes to mind. I might have read somewhere, perhaps. I'm not sure, but I know with the racehorse trainers, they're very anti-hay, and some of them even draw it 2 days before, which is it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and now the next question is your hard feed. So the timing of this is very important, particularly in the racing industry on that race day. So when you do have a performance horse, you've got competition day. Generally, it is during the day, so you're getting up early, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, to give them that hard feed, which includes their hay. But then what we're recommending is don't put the sen oil in that morning. Feed your sen grain free or your sen CF50 with your other calorie sources, the lupin pellet or a grain like oats if you're feeding that. But this timing is really important. So when grain, if you're adding it, which is high in sugar and starch, it shouldn't be fed within 4, 5, 6 hours before competition. So minimum 4 hours. And the reason why this is it causes an insulin response in the horse, and then that will stop the mobilization of muscle glycogen and fat stores, which needs to fuel the muscles. So in layman terms, by providing a hard feed that has grain in it will shortcut your energy in your horse and actually affect performance.
Yeah, well, that's extraordinary. So yeah, the take-home message is a minimum 4 hours. I think ideally, probably try to space it between 4 and 6 hours before. So as an example, if your competition is at midday, you'd want to be, at the bare minimum giving that hard feed sort of,
6 a.m.
Yeah, 6 a.m. because the horse might take a couple of hours sort of to finish the feed. And if you've got one that eats really quickly, you could do it at 7. If you got one that's a slow eater, you might do it at 5. So work on that window between 4 and 6 hours, and that's extremely important for performance.
Yeah, it's these little adjustments that can really get the best out of your horse. So if you were feeding within that time, that insulin response is not helping the energy for your horse during that competition if you were feeding inside those 4 hours from digestion and then that utilization. So if you can, and it is probably easier in the racing industry because they have their races in the afternoon, but all around that hard feed, that long stem roughage should be provided.
Yeah, ad lib, basically 24/7. The hay bag should never run out. That's what we preach.
And by doing this timing, you're setting your horse up for a better metabolic environment, both in the gastric health and also with its energy utilization of its nutrients.
Well, the grassy hay, Bryan, is helping with the digestion and the dilution of the sugar and starch in the grain source, whether it's oats or whatever the people might be feeding. So it's actually helping the digestion of the grain, so it doesn't just create that insulin spike like you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different with the endurance horses. So yes, at the start, don't provide those large grain meals within the 4-hour period. During the race, because it's over several kilometers, you've got to do that top up of glycogen stores, and they're only small grain feeds and they're not going to be a big burden on the insulin due to the lower requirement of insulin for the uptake of glycogen. So this happens shortly after intense exercise where you don't require a lot of insulin or no insulin for the muscle to use the glycogen. And this is like during a long distance horse event.
That's extremely well summarized. Bryan, probably the third one that we've come across for a while now as well is with withholding water as well. So some performance trainers out there do withhold the water the night before. To be honest with you, I don't know why they do it.
Well, I don't think a human athlete would do it.
Well, I'm just trying to use my common sense here. Like if I'm going to be not drinking water for 24 hours and I'm going to feel really thirsty, I'm probably going to be feeling a little bit sluggish as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of me wanting to go and perform on performance day being dehydrated, I don't know how I'm going to get a superior advantage in the performance when I'm dehydrated.
Yeah, and it also comes down with your electrolyte supplementation starting. If you're not feeding them routinely with the salt on an everyday basis, the night before competition, so then the horse has adequate time to have sufficient water intake, and then the cells uptake that water. Then you have sufficient hydration before the competition, and then it'll be utilized.
Yeah, that's well said, Bryan. And further on to that too, the electrolyte we recommend, say you've got your competition on a Saturday, we recommend that you start loading up on the electrolyte on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And what that does is, look, the horse might be sort of dehydrated previously, whether it's had a bit more work than what it's used to. It might be a little bit hotter, might be a little bit humid, might be stressing a little bit more. So you're better off going into a competition with a hydrated horse than a dehydrated horse. And why you need the electrolyte is the electrolytes obviously help push the water into the cell and not just keep it around the cell. So a lot of people don't know that you need the water inside the cell plus around the cell. When we've done a podcast on this previously, but I'm happy to explain it again. And what the electrolytes do is they actually push the water inside the cell, and to maintain hydration, you need the water inside the cell as well as outside the cell. And to ensure that, it will highly recommend that it's given on a double feed rate on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, just so you know that your horse is going to be fully hydrated and going into that particular competition, whatever it may be, fully hydrated, because you know that competition will take those electrolytes and that sweat out of the horse, so you're going to be topping up. But the issue is, if the horse is dehydrated before the competition, it's going to be even more dehydrated after the competition, and then some people get stuck with having to give a saline because it's just it's so far dehydrated that just normal electrolytes won't work.
Yeah, it's a risky way of going into competition if you are dehydrated, and it can have really adverse effects on muscle contractions, particularly the heart muscle. And that's when you see, even in the top level, in the race horses, you can have symptoms like the thumps, where issues related to the heart around hydration.
And further on, Bryan, to the thumps, and that's a prime example of dehydration. I have been present, obviously, when a horse has got the thumps watching track work, and the trainer was smart enough to get the vet out there. They sort of did a full diagnosis. She did get the bloods done, and it did come as an electrolyte imbalance. So it just sort of proves the point that you can't sort of muck around, and especially if you're in a hot, humid climate like sort of North Queensland, or even our customers in Western Australia, it's a very cost-effective way to make sure that that your horse is running at peak performance, and not sort of the dangers of having a horse that's dehydrated, possibly getting the thumps or other illnesses. Yeah,
well, that's well explained, Peter.
Bryan, I think that's the 3 myths busted that our client wanted us to explain today. I don't think there's anything else that.
No. So in a nutshell, do not restrict the roughage feeding. Find a good quality grassy hay and feed it ad lib. It won't have a detrimental effect on performance when fed on the morning of competition, because it has a nice nutrient profile, the grassy hay, and that's going to help provide that saliva production for that reduced gastric ulcer risk. But it also helps the horse mentally, as that chewing action is really beneficial for their health. And as we touched on right at the start, sen oil doesn't need to be fed on the day of competition, just due to the amount of energy it is used to digest it. So feed after the competition. We're trying to get that extra 1-2% of performance out of your horse. And these little changes, you can really help that energy production. And then the next thing we touched on was feeding that grain within 4 hours of exercise is not beneficial for their energy production during the exercise. And then lastly, the hydration, and ensuring your horse is hydrated before the competition, so then it can compete to its best ability.
That's very well summarised, Bryan. I think pretty much that does it. So we'll catch everyone again next week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.